3 hours before we were supposed to leave for a family trip, Mills suddenly said, "Are you really coming with us?" She reminded me that I'm just a daughter-in-law and suggested I should stay home. I was excited about this trip abroad and had planned everything. I hoped it would help me get closer to my in-laws, but instead of improving, things got worse. They didn't want me to go, and Mills seemed pleased about it. Even my husband didn't say anything to support me. I felt hurt and fed up. If they treated me like this, I decided I didn't care anymore. They would regret leaving me behind, wouldn't they? So I did something unexpected. As I watched them leave, let me introduce myself. I'm S, 28 years old, currently studying design at an ad agency. I married Rick almost a year ago. We met 3 years ago while working on an ad project. Our initial conversations were about work, but we soon discovered we both loved to travel. Rick prefers traveling within the country, while I enjoy international adventures. We bonded over our dream trips and shared photos of places we wanted to visit. Our connection deepened over time, and Rick proposed to me after 2 years of dating. Although we haven't had our honeymoon yet, Rick often says, "I want our first overseas trip to be our honeymoon." "Have you ever been abroad?" I asked him once. "No, I'd always worry about not being able to communicate well," he replied. "Don't worry. With smartphones and basic English, we'll manage," I reassured him. "Really? I'm not completely fluent in English either, but I still really want to travel abroad. Seeing the landscapes I've only seen on TV or in books up close is incredibly powerful," I said to my husband. "Yeah, you're right," he replied happily. "Japan has so many charming places and must-see attractions, but I'm drawn to traveling overseas. Every time I travel abroad, I'm amazed by the scale of everything. Experiencing those magnificent views up close, which you can't fully grasp just by staying in Japan, is the real thrill of international travel. Until now, I mostly traveled with friends or by myself. Now I can go on overseas trips with my beloved husband, and it's so joyful to share those experiences together." However, I didn't realize there was a side to my kind husband that I hadn't seen before. I noticed it about 2 months after we got married. As part of our marriage, we decided to rent an apartment halfway between our workplaces. Even though his company wasn't doing well and his salary wasn't high, he still had some income. Yet just 2 months into our marriage, he surprised me with a request. "Hey Sally, it's about the rent. Could you cover mine for a while?" "Huh? Why?" I mentioned my salary was cut. I tried asking my parents for money, but they said to ask my wife after marriage. I hate to pry, but is your pay that low? I asked, surprised. My husband nodded quietly. He had always been smiling, but seeing him like this, I couldn't bring myself to ask more questions. I never expected something like this just 2 months into our marriage. I felt disheartened. I should have made sure to understand each other's salaries before getting married. I couldn't ask him to take on extra work, especially with his already long hours. I simply said, "Got it," and decided to cover the rent completely starting that month. But that wasn't the only issue. The frequent visits from my in-laws to our new home became a major problem. My husband's family includes his father, mother, and sister Amy. Since I agreed to cover my husband's share of the rent, my in-laws started coming over more often. They would arrive unannounced, have dinner, and sometimes even stay overnight without warning. It's not that I disliked my in-laws, but I felt uncomfortable, especially around my mother-in-law, who seemed to hold a grudge against me. Whenever she visited, she would make snide remarks. "Hey Sally, just because you're busy doesn't mean you can neglect your chores, right?" "Huh? I'm doing the best I can with the chores," I replied. I heard from Rick that sometimes you come home later than him. As a wife, prioritizing work over household chores is unacceptable, you know, my mother-in-law remarked. "That's only when there's a deadline. Usually I leave on time and take care of things at home," I defended myself. Always getting defensive. "I bet work is more important to you than Rick, huh?" "That's not true. That's why I've said so many times that marrying into this family wasn't a good idea, right, Rick?" I turned to my husband, hoping for support. But he just chuckled uncomfortably and said, "Don't fight, okay?" It frustrated me most that my mother-in-law seemed to annoy me, but I was also angry at my husband for not standing up for me. Even when my father-in-law and sister-in-law made snide remarks, he just smiled and watched. He always went with the flow, which hurt me more than dealing with their comments. One day, when I came home from work, I found my husband looking at a Hawaii travel guidebook. "What's that for?" I asked, curious about the sudden interest in travel. As I asked, he lit up with excitement and eagerly began to speak. "Hey Sally, how about going on a trip to Hawaii together? You've been there before, right?" "Hawaii? I've been there like 3 times. "Yeah, I've been there, and my family also wants to go." "So your mom is coming too?" "Yeah, since we're already planning to go as a family, it'll be a family trip." To be honest, I felt nothing but anxiety about my husband's proposal. I really wanted to go on a trip abroad just with my husband, but with my in-laws involved, there were too many complications. Plus, I couldn't imagine my mother-in-law wanting to go on a trip with me, given how she felt about me. I tried to hint at my concerns indirectly, saying, I'd like to go to Hawaii, but I'm worried that your family won't enjoy themselves if I come along. That's not true. Besides, this trip was suggested by Mom, my husband replied. Hello. I called out as someone knocked on the door. We'll be right out. I raised my voice a bit and hurried to the front door. When I opened it, there stood my mother-in-law. Hello, Sally. Are you going out today? She asked. Huh? We're actually heading out on a trip right now. I'm really excited for Hawaii. It's been a while, I replied. What are you talking about? We're the ones going on the trip, she said, looking confused. Huh? I was momentarily taken aback by her statement. Just then my husband rushed over from inside the house, saying, sorry, and apologized for being late. Seeing him, my mother-in-law smiled broadly and said, Rick, you're so late. I've been waiting outside. Sorry, Mom. My hair wasn't cooperating, he explained. You could have fixed that later. Come on, let's go already. Dad and Amy are waiting. Go on, hurry, she urged. Mom, that bag looks heavy. Let me carry it for you, my husband offered. Thank you. You're always so kind, Rick, she praised him. My husband blushed happily at her words. I felt a bit uneasy for a moment, but since it was the beginning of the trip, I didn't want to start off feeling irritated. Following them, I grabbed my carry-on and began putting on my shoes. Then my mother-in-law looked puzzled and slowly said, Wait a minute, Sally. What are you doing? What do you mean? I'm putting on my shoes too. We're going on a trip together, I replied, confused. Enjoy your trip then, she said coldly. Huh? What are you saying? We're all going to Hawaii together, right? I said, bewildered. I glanced at my husband, but he avoided eye contact with me. Seeing his reaction, my mother-in-law chuckled mockingly and said, Seriously, you weren't actually planning to come along, were you? Huh? Come on, cut it out. Why would I not be coming on a family trip? But this is supposed to be a family trip, you know. Huh? You're just a daughter-in-law, so obviously you're staying home and holding down the fort. 3 hours before we were supposed to leave, just as I was about to walk out the door, my mother-in-law's unexpected remark hit me like a ton of bricks. It sent a wave of anguish through my chest, making me feel dizzy and unsteady. Rick, what does she mean? I asked, desperately seeking clarification from my husband. I asked my husband, but he didn't respond. Instead, he headed towards the car with my MIL, leaving me feeling like I might collapse any moment. In that instant, my feelings towards my husband and my in-laws cooled rapidly. What did I expect? Maybe it was foolish to hope my MIL would ever support me, but I never imagined Rick would betray me like this. It became clear he had no intention of standing by me from the start. It all felt so absurd. I decided I didn't care anymore. That's what I thought. I did love my husband, that much was true. But I realized I was in love with an idealized version of him, not the real person. A spineless puppet who couldn't stand up to his family, a pawn dancing to his mother's tune. What had I ever seen in him? If only I had seen this sooner, things might have turned out differently. But dwelling on regrets now won't change anything. I resolved to take action. Their trip was planned for a week starting today. With that knowledge, I packed my belongings into cardboard boxes and called my father to bring a car for me. As I waited for my father, my phone rang. It was my MIL calling. I knew why she was calling, but I ignored it deliberately. She must have been furious. She had been calling me incessantly lately. But I stood firm in my decision. I wasn't going to answer that call. Then my husband called. He probably had a lot to say. I took a deep breath and answered. Hello. Sally, you picked up. It's you? My husband sounded flustered, his voice trembling slightly. I could imagine how panicked he must be, and I couldn't help but laugh. What's wrong? Your mom kept calling me nonstop too. It's a disaster. We arrived in Hawaii fine, but I don't know where to go from here. I really want to check into the accommodation, but I don't know where it is or how to get there. What should I do? Huh? You're asking me now? You left without knowing anything, and now you're asking me. Isn't this your responsibility? But you made the reservation, right? I thought someone in the family would have the travel plans. And no one knew anything. Typical of my spontaneous in-laws, I chuckled bitterly, and he raised his voice. Just tell me the travel schedule already. No apologies, just irresponsible words from my husband. I knew it, but this guy is just his mother's son through and through. I muttered to myself, frustrated. I demanded to know the travel schedule from him firmly. Are you kidding me? I'm feeling seriously uncomfortable because of you guys, so why do you think only you should have fun? He protested. There's no way I'm telling you. Figure it out yourselves and manage on the spot, I retorted sharply. Did you what? That's too heartless, isn't it? I'll buy souvenirs, so he tried to reason. Souvenirs? I don't need them. Don't make a fool of me. I trusted you and put up with your family, but I've had enough. How could you? I couldn't hold back my disappointment. This incident made me realize that he's just as disappointing as his mother. I was used only for making travel plans and left out of the much-anticipated Hawaii trip. I couldn't forgive his family for this betrayal. Let them struggle in that unfamiliar place all they want. Wait, hey Sally. My husband's attempts to call my name fell on deaf ears as I firmly ended the call. After waiting for my father and leaving, I headed straight to my parents' house. Meanwhile, it turned out my husband and his family had a rough time in Hawaii without me. Despite arriving, they were in a panic because they didn't know where their original booking was. They ended up staying at a random luxury resort, paying $5,000 per night for 4 people, maxing out their credit cards in the process, which were declined. Eventually, they spent the last 3 days camping in Hawaii. With my husband's modest salary, there was no way he could pay off the maxed-out card. Ultimately, I decided to file for divorce, citing his financial irresponsibility. While I await my husband's agreement, I'm determined not to give up. I've already consulted a lawyer, so the divorce process is underway. This incident caused a rift in my husband's family. He blames his mother, and she blames him, leading to estrangement. As for me, I'll be staying with my parents until I find a new place. Initially worried, my parents now admire my resilience. I won't deny that I'm hurting, but dwelling on such a toxic family is pointless. This experience has taught me to better judge people in the future. That's my focus.